Now I made a video like this a while ago, but I didn't exactly explain myself very well. And now that I've played through every single Insane Tower, I think it's finally time I revisit these recommendations in a better substance. The Tower of Difficulty Chart. This tower's purpose is to gradually get harder and harder. This is the easiest soul crushing in the whole game. The only way that you might disagree on that is the terrifying floor. Unlike any other soul crushing, there's a safety net halfway through, making it not as punishing either. And the outsides aren't very long either. There's only 2 of them, and this one's only 3 jumps. This tower is rather short too, with an average run of being 15 minutes. There's a variety mixture of mechanics and purist gameplay, considering if you decide to do this tower, you will gain skill on both of them. Though if you're only good with one of those type, and not very good with the other, there are other towers coming up that use only one of those types, meaning most of the tower is either going to be mechanic-based or purist-based. Purist gameplay is gameplay that aren't mechanics, just basic platforms, and mechanics are client objects, with a client-sided essence. If you consider doing this, it is recommended you beat at least 8 remorseless towers, with one of them being mid or higher. There are lots of skips in this tower worth mentioning too, but you can look up a guide if you don't know where they are. The difficulties in this tower aren't very accurate. For example, the challenging floor is actually difficult difficulty, and the terrifying floor is harder than the catastrophic floor, though this tower was made to gradually get harder each floor. The Tower of Bent Trauma. With a phenomenal atmosphere to it, this is probably the second easiest soul crushing in the game. But unlike difficulty chart where half the floors are easy and half of them are hard, all the floors are rather challenging. Though all the floors in this tower are easier than the hardest floors in difficulty chart. This is a purist based ascending tower, and if you fall once you have to restart the whole thing, as it is bending outwards progressively. This is another really short tower. An average run would be about 12 to 13 minutes, maybe 15. Most of the gameplay is remorseless with some really long wraparound spike, but it is soul crushing due to its punishment. There are almost no mechanics in this tower. It's really a test of your skill to see how good you are at strong purism. This tower's theme was based off of Little Inferno. Not to mention this is the community's favourite soul crusher. It is absolutely amazing. The Tower of High Adrenaline. I said before that this was easier than Bent Trauma, because the final 2 floors of this tower are safety netted, just like the halfway point on difficulty chart is safety netted. But the raw gameplay is evidently a lot harder. This is also a mix between. This tower is mostly client object based. Going back to Bent Trauma for a second, it is recommended you beat 9 remorseless towers before attempting this tower, with one of them being mid or higher. The same goes for High Adrenaline. Both towers are around the same difficulty. It all depends which type you're more consistent with, mechanics or purism, as some people find this easier than Bent Trauma. This tower's punishment is rather low, with a lot of the sections being extremely friendly, but this tower's famous for its infamous outside that extends 2 floors in a row. Just like most II Alert towers, the gradient is 2 colours in a row and then goes to a completely different colour. There are a few just random and weird secrets hidden in this tower. This is probably the 3rd easiest soul crushing in the game, or 2nd. Though this tower is mostly client object based, there's some point with lots of strong purism used throughout this tower, but there's almost little to none. Actually, just ignore that last sentence. This tower is a little bit longer, with an average run being around 20 minutes, but that's not long in my opinion. Anyways, onto the next tower. The Tower of Double Trouble. This is the 4th tower recommendation, and it is already getting a lot harder. We are now leaving the easiest soul-crushing area. This tower is even more purist-based than Tower of Bent Trauma, and just like Bent Trauma, most of the gameplay is remorseless, but this tower is very long. Bent Trauma is soul-crushing for its punishment, and this is soul-crushing for its length and endurance. and also because there's a terrifying jump on a soul crush. This tower requires extreme dedication. An average run would be about 25 minutes to 35 minutes, though that's pure guess. Bent Trauma had an undescribable style of gameplay, with the trusses in Bent Trauma making up most of the difficulty in Bent Trauma, using lots of rotated platforms. But this one is lots of basic wraparounds. The Tower of Double Trouble is infamous for its punishing and really difficult seaside. This tower is split into 3 sections. This segment is the main part of the tower, and then it turns into a dissension-based section, which is B-side, the second side of the tower. This is the side that uses lots of client objects and mechanics, though this is the easiest side. This is much easier compared to the rest of the tower, and not very punishing at all. It doesn't send you back very far. But Seaside is very punishing, as it will send you back really far. This tower is mainly recognizable for its basic wraparound lengths and alignments. Nearing the end of the tower, tightropes can be used, which can be extreme pain for mobile players. The Tower of Thinning Layers. Using the same style of gameplay as Bent Trauma, this is Bent Trauma but shorter, but way much harder. The tower's layers thin, meaning there's less gameplay to work with, and the floors get shorter each floor. Some of the gameplay revolves around the center, making it near impossible to fall all the way down, but enough to fall a very long way. There's no design in this tower, meaning no extra parts or lag, meaning you can get a much more flawless experience compared to any other soul crushing. This is the shortest soul crushing in the whole game. You can beat this in under 10 minutes, but it's infamous for its extremely painful final outside. If you fail once, you have to restart the whole thing. It can be extremely stressful and trauma-inducing once you fail. The tower isn't so punishing on the inside. Actually, it is very... This is the most beaten soul crushing in the game as well. Difficulty chart in 2nd place in completions. That's only because it's extremely short and rebeatable. This tower is entirely purist. There are no mechanics in this whatsoever. This is the shorter recommendation for Bent Trauma. No, Double Trouble, sorry. Double Trouble's just an easier version, but longer. For this tower, it is recommended you beat at least 11 to 12 remorseless towers, with at least one of them being high or higher. And for Double Trouble, at least 10 to 11 remorseless towers, or maybe 9, with at least one of them being mid to high or higher, or maybe mid or higher. The Tower of Inevitable Failure. This is my final recommendation. And this is yet another purist-based soul crushing. There's 2 purist types I forgot to tell you about. Wraparounds and truss flicks. Double Trouble and Thinning Layers are wraparound based. While Bent Trauma is mostly wraparound based too, the truss flicks make most of the difficulty in the tower, so Bent Trauma is both. Inevitable Failure uses quite a lot of wraparounds too, but it is, however, mostly truss flick based. If you are unsure what those are, this is a wraparound, and this is a truss flick. In the Remorseless category, Tower of True Skill is the wraparound starter Remorseless, and Tower of Niflheim is the truss flick based Remorseless. This tower is rather short, with an average length being 12 to 15 minutes. Just like Bent Trauma, this tower's decoration and frame is really good. In my opinion, this would be the 4th easiest soul crushing, but this is an opinion this time, as some people think this is high insane. Trusses are things you climb on, and wraparounds are things you jump around. However, that's going to be the end of the video, as I don't really have much else to talk about this tower. Tower of Difficulty chart, Bent Trauma and High Adrenaline are bottom insane, in my opinion. Inevitable Failure I'd say is a low insane. I'd say Double Trouble is a low to mid, and I'd say Thinning Layers is a mid insane, but it all depends on how good you are with these towers. Before I end off the video, I'm going to give a reason as of why you shouldn't do the rest of the soul crushings as your first soul crushing. Curve Descent. In the same area, 2 towers are easier, Bent Trauma and High Adrenaline, meaning you should do it after both of them, or just one. Extreme Hell is going to be moved down to Remorseless soon, and most people don't enjoy this tower anyways, or nerfed down. I had a mental breakdown playing through this tower. Thanos Tower is my favourite soul crushing, but there are other soul crushings easier than it. Writing in confusing trials is entirely purist like finning layers, but finning layers is easier, and finning layers is also shorter, so I don't know why would you want to do this tower. This is also the hardest insane in the game. So if you're thinking about purism, do finning layers instead of writing confusing trials, even if you're consistent with 2 fact. Going back to Tower of Confusion, never play this tower, don't ever enter the portal. Now, however, I don't have a reason for Icy Blizzards or Polychromatic Zero, you can do them if you want to. But Polychromatic Zero is amongst the hardest insanes as well, and there are other soul crushings easier than it. Though, however, you can do Icy Blizzards if you want to. It's just not people's favourite. The difficulty chart says this is peak insane and amongst the hardest insanes as well, but in my opinion it's lower end insane. I'm not going to recommend it though.